Good morning, Boston Square. My name is Mackenzie Jagger. I am a third-year seminary student at Western Theological in Holland, Michigan. I did my undergrad work at Taylor University in Indiana, and I've also lived abroad in England and on the East Coast near Washington, D.C. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning in some fashion. This morning, our text will come to us from the first chapter of Esther. So hear these words from the book that we love. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and the ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days, in the courts of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings, marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of all different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by the flagons, without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of the palace to do as each one desired. Queen Vashti gave a banquet for all the women of the palace. On the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. And at this the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws, for this was his custom toward all who were versed in law and custom. And those next to him were Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, Memucan, the 7 officials of Persia and Media, who had access to the king and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and to all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him. She did not come. This very day, the nobles ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end to contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the kings give her royal position to one who is better than she, so that when this decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan had proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be the master of his own house. Now, when I was in the 4th grade, I was in a play called Malice in the Palace, The Story of Esther. The directors gave me glittery gold pants, Harry Potter glasses, and a very itchy crop top / vest thing, and told me that I was to be the record keeper. The perfect job for a very nerdy, very sincere 4th grade Mackenzie. My friend Bethany played the beautiful Queen Vashti. They brought in a 6th grader from the middle school to play Queen Esther, but I don't remember who played the king. And considering the text we just read, that's very surprising. In this first chapter of Esther, we cannot look away from the king. The narrator makes sure of it. King Ahasuerus dominates this chapter, quite literally. The narrator paints us a staggering picture of King Ahasuerus. He rules 127 provinces from a throne, but not just any throne, a royal throne. And after a garish party that lasts 180 days, he throws another party, this one a week-long bender. We get the sense that this king is a pumped-up frat boy hosting the party of the year. He's showing off his mansion and his hot tubs and his trophies, except on the scale of a kingdom that stretches from India to Ethiopia. This king cannot get enough of himself, and he's doing his best to make sure the rest of the world knows how great he is too. It has taken the king 6 months to show off his kingdom, and now, on the last night of his opulent party, he has just one more shiny possession to dangle in front of his guests: his wife, Queen Vashti. Now, in this man's kingdom, it is punishable by death to appear before the king without an invitation. So we can only imagine what the punishment might be for refusing to appear before him. But when 7 eunuchs appear at Vashti's door and say that the king wants her to parade around the banquet hall in her crown, Vashti refuses to go. I can't imagine her making that decision lightly or out of spite, as some commentators have suggested. Instead, I picture a young woman confronted by 7 men. 7 men who report to the most powerful man in the world, and still somehow coming to the conclusion that she would rather die, because really that's the only other option Vashti's working with. Vashti would rather die than be treated like a jewel in the king's collection. When the king hears that she's not coming and he can't show her off to his drunk friends, he is predictably enraged. He is the most powerful man in the world, and yet he can't even get his own wife to obey him. It is an insult that cannot be borne, and he knows he must act. Only he doesn't know his own laws well enough to know what to do. So he calls in the experts, and he asks them. Only Vashti didn't exactly break any laws. So they invent a law. They invent a law that will not only punish Vashti for her stubborn behavior, but will ensure that women throughout the kingdom will remember that their place is far, far beneath men. Under the influence of his advisors, King Ahasuerus ends up turning a personal, marital conflict into a state crisis. He doesn't seem to catch the irony that rather than helping him keep this embarrassment quiet, his advisors are spreading the word throughout the kingdom in all the local languages. Now everyone will know exactly how Queen Vashti humiliated him. Additionally, this new law says that men are to be the masters of their own houses, except the king has already failed in this role. So I guess the message is, we hope you have better luck than he did. It's like they're saying, here, we have created a law to try to help you do what King Ahasuerus could not do. Women sure are annoying, aren't they? We hope this helps men everywhere regain their confidence and authority. This king is trying to rule by manipulation. He threw a 6-month party to try to manipulate his kingdom into being impressed with him. But he doesn't even know his own laws. We might admire him for keeping a trusted circle of advisors around him, but they too turn out to be disappointments. The advisors fail him, and they fail the empire. These men are so afraid of power slipping through their fingers that they make the oppression and domination of women the law of the land. The king may rule 127 provinces from his royal throne and have palaces full of literal and figurative jewels, but all that pomp and flash can't quite cover up his deficits. The narrator sees through him, and if we read this dark, funny chapter carefully, we see that power in this kingdom means manipulation. Power in this empire is all about objectification and dehumanization. Power is all about keeping yourself on the top, no matter the cost. I wonder if we can see the parallels between King Ahasuerus' empire and the empire that we find ourselves in. In our empire, big tech companies manipulate us into buying products we don't need from ethically questionable sources. Social media platforms manipulate us into reading, sharing, and commenting on inflammatory articles that leave little room for nuance or helpful conversation, and lots of room for bitterness and fury. In this empire, we are often reduced from human beings with unique stories of joy and pain into data, into consumers, into a profit. And it's not just humans who are objectified in this system. The rest of creation suffers too. Rainforests are chopped down to make toilet paper. Mountains are blown to bits to make coal extraction a little easier. 8 million tons of plastic are dumped into the oceans each year, creating poisonous environments for the marine life, as well as trash islands that are now 2 times the size of Texas. In this kind of empire, when leaders face critique or scandal, rather than owning up to their failures and mistakes, rather than repenting, they dig in deeper. They build fortresses of protection around their egos, and they lock their fists around power. There is a lot of pomp and flash, and it is not enough to cover up the deficits. We look around in Esther 1 and we see ourselves. We read this story and realize we might as well be living in King Ahasuerus' empire. But what hope does that leave us with? What hope can there be in an empire like this? I think the answer comes from a careful reading of this first chapter of Esther. Maybe no explicit hope is given, but we have a smart, clever narrator. He or she is not drawn in by the king's pomp and flash. The author sees right through Ahasuerus and helps us to do the same. We do not have to accept the king's power schemes or value systems as our own. The narrator certainly doesn't. And I think the narrator's voice gives us a key to understanding God's view of power and God's value systems. To the king, Vashti is an object, a possession, just another jewel to admire and show off, much like the crown he wanted her to wear at the party. Vashti, as one commentator puts it, lives in a world without compassion. She is ruled by a king and a husband who relegates her to the shadows while he stands in the sun. In the value system of the king, Vashti is a commodity. When King Ahasuerus can no longer use Vashti to further his goals, he discards her. And in such a system as that, God still sees Vashti. Ahasuerus is blind to Vashti's personhood, to her true value that goes beyond her pretty face or what she can offer him and his reputation. He shoves her into the shadows and then banishes her even further, so thoroughly and so ruthlessly that we never hear from her again. But But in the shadows of the king and his palace, and even in banishment, God sees Vashti. God does not forget her. God does not buy into Ahasuerus' valuing or devaluing of human beings. God is working with a different set of values, a very different idea of power. So for those of us who find ourselves in a political system that doesn't see us as humans, but as commodities, Vashti's story can be a comfort and an inspiration. Vashti refused to buy into or participate in a system that said she was only worth what she could provide for the powerful. But even more importantly, Vashti is never manipulated, commodified, or discarded by God. She is seen. She is loved. She is not forgotten even when she disappears from the page. No matter what the empire says about us or demands from us, we can say the same. The power schemes and value systems of this world will fail us and dehumanize us over and over again. But even in the margins and the shadows, we are seen by God. And because God's power schemes and value systems are at odds with the empires, we will never be manipulated, commodified, or discarded by God. We will be held. Julian of Norwich, who's a 14th century mystic, became quite ill in her 30s. When she was near death, Julian reported a series of visions in which God revealed God's love for her, creation, and all of humanity. She dreamed that everything in the created cosmos was as small as a hazelnut, and that it fit in the palm of God's hand. God held it tenderly, loving it, sustaining it, never letting it slip through God's fingers. We are just specks clinging to that hazelnut. We're so small, we might not be visible even with the help of a microscope. But God still sees us. God holds us tenderly and fiercely. Have you ever experienced that? Have you woken up in the dead of the night with a crushing sense of terror or loneliness, only to find, miraculously, that you're actually held in the loving presence of God? Have you ever gotten a note from a friend at just the right time, with just the right words, and believed that somehow God was communicating God's love to you through that friend? Have you ever experienced God's love and delight for you when you watch the stars or the waves or watch the wind blowing through the leaves? We are held and known and loved by God. Can you feel it? The empire has an insatiable thirst for power that eats away at the worth and the very lives of the most vulnerable. But in God's economy, to die for one's friends, even to die on a cross, is a picture of power. In God's economy, sacrificial love is power. Friends, we are caught between competing kingdoms, the kingdom of empire and the kingdom of God. In the one, we are commodities. In the other, we are beloved. Like Vashti, we may experience consequences for turning our backs on the values of the empire. But even in banishment, we will not be forgotten. We might live in the empire, but we are also part of the kingdom. And in the kingdom, we can trust that we are known, loved, and held by the God of the universe, who is above all kings